How are the plugs looking?
Bit rough on cylinder 3, but it'll hold.
This is unacceptable. We have 24 hours to get these planes flight ready. Mobilize every man we have.
Dawn breaks low over a forward Allied airfield. Not with light, but with tension. The ground is hard beneath frozen boots. Oil stains the concrete like dark fingerprints. 50 aircraft sit in rows, noses pointed toward a pale horizon they are not yet allowed to enter. Their metal skins are cold, silent, waiting. Pilots stand nearby, hands buried deep in jackets, eyes fixed on machines that should already be warming. Engines remain still. No propellers turn. No radios crackle with clearance. The problem is not enemy fire. It is not fuel. It is not courage. It is something smaller. Something buried beneath cowling panels and inspection plates. A fault so ordinary it nearly escapes notice, and so widespread it threatens to ground an entire day's war. At the edge of the line, away from briefings and command tents, a mechanic kneels beside one aircraft. His hands are blackened. His movements are precise. He is not racing time. He is arguing with it. Because if these planes do not fly today, something ahead of them, on the ground, at sea, or in the air, will face the enemy alone. And that reality is already shaping the war long before the first engine turns. By the time the sun rises over that airfield, the war has already settled into a brutal rhythm. It is a conflict no longer measured by declarations or speeches, but by production charts, sortie counts, and the quiet arithmetic of loss. Across Europe, North Africa, and the Atlantic, the balance of power in the air is fragile. Every mission depends not only on pilots and tactics, but on whether aircraft can physically leave the ground. By late 1941 and into 1942, the Allied air forces are expanding faster than their infrastructure can sustain. Britain's Royal Air Force is stretched across home defense, convoy protection, and growing offensive raids over occupied Europe. The United States Army Air Forces, newly committed, are building squadrons almost as quickly as they could train crews. Aircraft roll out of factories in rising numbers, but readiness lags behind output. An aircraft listed on paper is not the same as an aircraft ready for combat. The reality of wartime aviation is unforgiving. Engines demand constant attention. Fuel systems clog with contaminants. Electrical connections corrode. Cooling systems fail under desert heat or northern cold. A single unresolved fault can ground an aircraft indefinitely, or worse, send it into the air only to fail at altitude. Air doctrine evolves rapidly during this period. Commanders demand higher sortie rates, longer missions, heavier payloads. Bombers are expected to fly day after day with minimal downtime. Fighters are scrambled repeatedly with little margin for mechanical rest. Maintenance crews, already understaffed, are pushed to operate in conditions they were never trained for in peacetime. Forward airfields magnify every weakness. Many are improvised strips carved from farmland, desert flats, or coastal scrub. Dust infiltrates engines. Mud fouls landing gear. Spare parts arrive late or not at all. Technical manuals, written for factory floors and permanent bases, do not always account for field realities. In theory, Allied logistics are superior. In practice, supply lines stretch across oceans. A replacement component might take weeks to arrive, time no commander believes he has. The pressure does not come only from above. Enemy forces understand the fragility of air power. Luftwaffe intelligence studies Allied airfields, identifying patterns of downtime. Axis ground forces advance when they believe air cover is weak. Submarines surface when patrols thin. Every grounded aircraft creates a gap, one the enemy is ready to exploit. By this stage of the war, commanders no longer ask how many aircraft they possess. They ask how many can fly today. And on this particular morning, on this particular airfield, that number is dangerously close to collapsing. Because across the line of parked machines, the same malfunction has begun to appear. One by one, quietly, persistently, a failure that no bomb caused, no bullet created, yet one that threatens to remove 50 aircraft from the war in a single stroke. And the realization is spreading, slowly, through the maintenance crews who are now working against something more dangerous than enemy fire: time. The aircraft involved are not experimental machines or rare prototypes. They're workhorses, medium bombers and single-engine fighters, the kind flown in numbers large enough to shape an operation rather than a headline. Aircraft that formed the backbone of Allied air power in the early and middle years of the war. Rugged by design, but never indestructible. They operate in an environment that pushes every tolerance to its limit. Engines are run hard, often beyond recommended service intervals. Fuel quality varies depending on supply routes and storage conditions. Maintenance crews adapt constantly, cannibalizing parts from damaged airframes to keep others operational. What matters most is not perfection, but availability. The squadron assigned to this airfield has a clear mission profile: daily patrols, scheduled strikes, escort duty timed to bomber formations further down the line. Their aircraft are expected to launch in waves, return, refuel, and launch again. Any reduction in numbers has an immediate ripple effect. Lose 5 aircraft and coverage thins. Lose 10 and missions are delayed. Lose 50 and an entire operation collapses. The problem begins subtly. Engines that hesitate during run-up. Instruments that fluctuate just enough to raise concern. Mechanics notice irregularities in engine temperatures, fuel pressure readings, or ignition response. Nothing catastrophic yet, but enough to force caution. Under wartime regulations, aircraft showing repeatable anomalies cannot be cleared to fly. Grounding begins with one aircraft, then another, then several more, all presenting variations of the same symptoms. The pattern becomes impossible to ignore. At first, crews suspect wear. These machines have flown hard missions, but inspections reveal no cracked components, no obvious leaks, no broken parts that can be swapped out. Attention turns to systems shared across the fleet. Fuel delivery, carburation, magnetos, cooling airflow. Each is examined in turn, tested against manuals that assume ideal conditions, conditions this airfield does not offer. The manuals do not account for dust drawn into engines during taxi. They do not account for rapid temperature swings between night and day. They do not account for fuel stored in field tanks under constant exposure. What they do say is clear. Unresolved engine irregularities lead to engine failure in flight. Pilots are not eager to test that theory. As the morning progresses, more aircraft are red tagged. 50 is no longer an abstract number. It is a count written on chalkboards and muttered under breath. Command staff begin recalculating sortie schedules. Mission planners look for alternatives that do not exist. Orders begin to tighten. Deadlines creep closer. The margin disappears. And while command debates options, the responsibility falls to the men on the line. Mechanics who know that whatever is wrong is not isolated. It is systemic. Somewhere within these identical machines lies a shared weakness. Not dramatic, not visible, but if it remains unfixed, the day's war will be fought without them. And that understanding pushes one mechanic to stop following the checklist and start questioning it. The first angle is human, and it unfolds far from the cockpit. Aircraft mechanics in the Second World War live in a constant state of urgency. Their work begins before dawn and ends long after darkness returns. Unlike pilots, they do not rotate out after missions. They remain with the aircraft, absorbing every failure, every return that comes back damaged or does not return at all. They are trained to follow procedure. Checklists exist for a reason. But wartime reality often forces improvisation, and improvisation carries risk. A mistake made on the ground does not announce itself until thousands of feet in the air. On this airfield, fatigue is already present. Crews have been working extended shifts for weeks. Parts shortages force workarounds that would be unacceptable in peacetime. Each mechanic knows that grounding an aircraft may save a life or cost an operation. The second angle is technical. The symptoms appearing across the fleet point toward a shared system under stress. Not structural damage, not battle wear, but a performance degradation that emerges only after sustained use. Engines run, but not cleanly. Power delivery becomes inconsistent. Gauges offer warnings without explanations. This is the kind of problem that hides in margins. A slightly altered fuel-air mixture. A component operating just outside optimal tolerance. A condition triggered only after multiple cycles. These issues are the most dangerous. They do not break loudly. They erode reliability quietly. The third angle is operational. Air operations depend on predictability. Commanders plan missions assuming a certain number of aircraft will launch and return. Escort fighters are timed to bomber speeds. Ground forces move based on expected air cover. A sudden reduction in aircraft availability forces immediate compromises. Delays expose formations to interception. Reduced numbers increase losses. Canceled missions hand initiative to the enemy. From headquarters, the pressure flows downward. There is no time to remove engines for full teardown inspections. There is no reserve pool of replacements. What flies today must be what is already here. And beneath all of this is a simple truth. Maintenance is invisible until it fails. Pilots are briefed. Crews are assembled. Targets are fixed on maps. But none of it matters if engines cannot be trusted to carry aircraft to altitude and back again. As the day advances, the problem sharpens. More aircraft are sidelined not because they are broken, but because no one can prove they are safe. That uncertainty weighs heavily, because in war, uncertainty is contagious. And somewhere among the rows of grounded machines, one mechanic begins to look not at what is failing, but at what all these aircraft still share. The fourth angle is leadership, and it presses down from above with quiet force. Squadron commanders are not indifferent to mechanical caution, but they are bound by orders that leave little room for delay. Every aircraft grounded must be justified, every delay reported. In briefings, words like acceptable risk and operational necessity begin to appear, carefully chosen but heavy with implication. Leadership understands the danger of pushing aircraft into the air with unresolved issues. They also understand the danger of inaction. Intelligence reports indicate enemy movement. Patrol gaps are already being noted. A day without air presence is not neutral. It is an invitation. Yet even under pressure, there is a line that cannot be crossed. An aircraft that fails in flight does more than destroy itself. It takes trained crews with it. Training pipelines cannot replace experience quickly. Leaders know this. They have seen what happens when mechanical warnings are ignored. So the burden shifts back to the ground. Find the cause. Fix it fast. Prove it works. The fifth angle is the enemy. Opposing forces may never know why Allied aircraft fail to appear over a sector, but they will exploit the absence immediately. Enemy fighters grow bolder when patrols thin. Ground units move during daylight. Supply convoys take risks they would otherwise avoid. Air superiority is not a permanent state. It must be maintained hour by hour. Every grounded Allied aircraft slightly tilts that balance. The final angle is moral, and it rests on responsibility without recognition. Mechanics do not sign mission reports. They are not credited with victories. When aircraft return safely, the work that made it possible disappears into routine. When something goes wrong, scrutiny is immediate and unforgiving. The mechanic now working through the problem understands this balance instinctively. He knows that proposing a fix outside standard procedure carries personal risk. If it fails, accountability will be swift. If it succeeds, it may never be mentioned. Still, the evidence is becoming clearer. The aircraft all passed inspections before deployment. The symptoms emerged only after extended operation in this environment. The manuals assume conditions that no longer exist. The fix, if there is one, will not be dramatic. It will not involve a new part or a shipment from across the ocean. It will involve adjustment, calibration, a small correction applied consistently. This mechanic begins testing a hypothesis, not by grounding more aircraft, but by isolating one, not by replacing components, but by changing how they interact, not by rewriting doctrine, but by adapting it. As tools come out and panels are removed, the pressure reaches its peak. Because within the next hours, engines will either run clean or the day's missions will vanish before they begin. And the moment of decision is no longer theoretical. It is mechanical. The decisive moment does not arrive with an alarm or an announcement. It arrives quietly, measured in engine revolutions and gauge behavior. The mechanic chooses one aircraft already grounded, one showing the same irregularities as the others. Cowling panels are removed again, not to search for damage, but to observe behavior under controlled conditions. The engine is run longer than usual, not pushed to failure, but allowed to drift into the range where problems have been appearing. Temperatures rise. Fuel pressure fluctuates. Power response lags. And then the pattern becomes unmistakable. The issue is not that fuel is failing to reach the engine. It is that the mixture is no longer correct once operating conditions change. What works during initial run-up degrades after sustained use. The engine is not starved. It is misfed. The mechanic traces the system backward. Carburetor settings, linkages, intake airflow. He compares factory specifications against the reality of this airfield, its dust, its altitude, its temperature swings. The manuals assume clean air. They assume consistent fuel quality. They assume conditions that existed months ago, far from here. What he sees instead is gradual fouling. Fine particulate matter altering airflow. Slight mixture enrichment occurring not at idle, but under sustained load. Enough to cause incomplete combustion. Enough to create hesitation, overheating, and power loss. Enough to ground an aircraft. The fix does not require replacement parts. It requires recalibration. The mechanic adjusts the mixture settings, carefully, incrementally, compensating for environmental conditions rather than factory defaults. He tightens tolerances that have drifted under operational stress. He cleans intake pathways that are not blocked, but subtly compromised. Then the engine is run again. Minutes pass. Temperatures stabilize. Throttle response smooths. No surge. No hesitation. No warning signs. This is not proof yet. One engine running clean does not save 50 aircraft. Wartime aviation is littered with fixes that worked once and failed twice. So the mechanic repeats the process. A second aircraft, then a third. Each shows the same behavior. Each responds to the same correction. The pattern holds. Word spreads quickly. not through celebration, but through urgency. Other mechanics are called over. Supervisors watch the instruments. Engines are run longer, harder. Time is running out. If this adjustment is wrong, it will reveal itself soon, possibly in the air. If it is right, the difference will be immediate. As the final test completes, the mechanic steps back. The engine idles cleanly. Power increases without protest. Gauges remain steady. Across the airfield, similar adjustments begin almost simultaneously. 50 aircraft do not come back online at once. They come back one by one, methodically, carefully, and as the last engine is cleared for startup, the sound changes. From silence to readiness. The first propeller turns slowly, then faster, then settles into a steady rhythm, is followed by another, and another. Across the airfield, the sound builds, not into chaos, but into order. Engines warmed and tested. Final checks completed. Pilots climb into cockpits that had been empty only hours earlier. Ground crews step back, watching exhaust patterns, listening for hesitation that never comes. One by one, aircraft begin a taxi. There is no announcement that the crisis has passed. There is only motion. Machines that were moments from being sidelined now roll toward the runway, guided by hand signals and habit. Takeoff begins on schedule, but just barely. The first aircraft lifts cleanly, climbing without strain. Engine instruments remain stable. The second follows, then the third. Formation spacing tightens as confidence returns, not emotionally, but mechanically. These aircraft are not flying because command demanded it. They're flying because they can. As the final group departs, 50 aircraft are back in the air where only hours earlier zero had been considered reliable. The difference is not visible from altitude. From above, they look like any other mission. But below, the meaning is understood. Escort coverage holds. Patrol gaps remain closed. Scheduled strikes proceed. Enemy aircraft encounter resistance they did not expect. Ground forces moving under the assumption of weakened air cover are suddenly exposed. Convoys alter course. Reconnaissance reports shift tone. Nothing about this appears in headlines, but mission reports reflect it clearly. Losses are lower than anticipated. Engines perform within limits. No aircraft abort due to mechanical failure. No emergency landings trace back to the earlier problem. Later inspections confirm what was suspected. The adjustment compensated for environmental degradation that had been slowly undermining engine performance across the entire squadron. Without intervention, failures would have increased, not decreased, with continued operation. The fix is logged quietly, not as a breakthrough, but as a correction. Maintenance procedures are updated locally. Mixture settings are checked more frequently. Intake cleanliness is prioritized despite limited resources. Other units operating under similar conditions begin to notice the same pattern. The war does not pause to acknowledge this moment. There are no medals issued for stabilized engine temperatures. No citations for recalibrated carburetors. The mechanic returns to the line, moving on to the next aircraft, the next problem already forming. But for one critical day, the air remained contested. The enemy was denied opportunity. 50 aircraft carried their crews into combat and brought them back. And that success sets the stage for consequences that will unfold quietly, long after the engines cool. The immediate effects are measured not in celebration, but in absence. There are no emergency landings reported that evening. No aircraft returned early with unexplained power loss. Maintenance logs, usually crowded with cautionary notes, remain unusually restrained. Engines are inspected while still warm, spark plugs examined, intake paths checked again for signs of stress. They find none beyond what is expected. Mission reports tell the rest of the story indirectly. Patrols maintain scheduled durations. Escort formations remain intact. Bombers reach their targets without mechanical attrition, thinning their ranks before contact with the enemy. In wartime aviation, this is success in its purest form. Losses that might have occurred simply do not. Aircrew return with fatigue rather than relief. The war continues at its normal pace, uninterrupted by the quiet crisis that nearly removed 50 aircraft from the fight. Command notices the stability quickly, not with praise, but with reduced scrutiny. When aircraft continue flying without incident, attention shifts elsewhere, to fuel allocation, to upcoming operations, to the next problem waiting just beyond the horizon. The mechanic responsible for the fix does not receive a commendation. He is not summoned for debrief. His name appears nowhere outside routine logs. This is typical. Ground crews operate in a space where success is defined by invisibility. Yet the implications are not lost on those who witness the moment. Supervisors begin ensuring the adjustment is applied across the unit. Training sessions include discussion of environmental effects on engine performance. New mechanics are warned not to trust factory settings blindly when conditions change. The fix remains local at first. It is not disseminated through official channels immediately. Wartime bureaucracy moves cautiously, even when solutions are clear. But word travels through informal networks, between airfields, through transferred personnel, in quiet conversations over toolboxes and engine stands. Similar symptoms are recognized elsewhere. Similar corrections are attempted. In many cases, they work. What had been treated as isolated mechanical fatigue is increasingly understood as a systemic issue of adaptation. Aircraft designed for one set of conditions must survive in many. The enemy never knows how close the balance came to shifting, but the crews on the ground do. They understand how easily air superiority can be lost, not through defeat, but through neglect of small, compounding details. And as operations continue, the war absorbs this lesson without pause, folding it into the endless process of adjustment and survival. Yet this moment, quiet, technical, unrecorded, has already altered the trajectory of dozens of missions, and its deeper consequences are still unfolding. In the weeks that follow, the adjustment becomes routine. What began as an improvised correction hardens into standard practice at the unit level. Mixture settings are no longer treated as static values. They are checked against weather reports, altitude, dust conditions, and fuel quality. Intake inspections, once secondary to structural concerns, are moved higher on maintenance priorities. These changes do not require new equipment. They require awareness. Other squadrons operating in similar environments report parallel issues and similar resolutions. Maintenance officers begin exchanging notes. What had seemed like isolated mechanical unreliability is increasingly understood as a predictable response to sustained field conditions. The lesson spreads quietly through the Allied air forces. Aircraft reliability is not just a matter of design, it is a matter of context. As operations expand, this understanding becomes critical. Air campaigns grow larger. Sortie rates increase. Aircraft are expected to perform across climates their designers never fully anticipated. The ability to adapt systems without waiting for factory-level intervention becomes a strategic advantage. This shift influences training. New mechanics are taught not only how systems are supposed to work, but how they behave when stressed over time. They are encouraged to observe patterns rather than wait for failures. The line between procedure and judgment is acknowledged openly. In official histories, these developments rarely appear as turning points. They are absorbed into broader narratives of industrial capacity and technological superiority. But on the ground, among those responsible for keeping aircraft airborne, the memory persists. The mechanic who initiated the fix is eventually reassigned, as all personnel are. He leaves behind no signature innovation, no named modification, but the mindset he demonstrated, the willingness to question assumptions under pressure, remains. The aircraft themselves continue flying until replaced, lost, or worn beyond repair. Their reliability improves not because they were redesigned, but because they were understood more completely. The war moves on, consuming attention with larger battles and louder decisions. Yet the margin between success and failure remains thin. Air superiority continues to depend not only on pilots and planners, but on countless small adjustments made far from the front lines. Adjustments that never appear in victory summaries, but shape them all the same. And as the conflict pushes forward into new theaters and harsher conditions, the importance of those unseen decisions only grows, leading quietly toward a final understanding of what this moment truly meant. War is often measured in grand maneuvers, strategic victories, and decisive battles. Yet, for every headline, there are countless quiet moments like this. Moments where human attention to detail, patient observation, and steady hands shape outcomes just as decisively as any command order. The mechanic's fix did not make the news. No photograph captured the sweat, oil, and concentration of his work. It did not appear in dispatches. Yet without it, 50 aircraft, machines critical to operations that day, would have remained grounded, their crews idle, their missions jeopardized. The airspace would have been thinner. The enemy would have moved with greater confidence. The balance of countless engagements might have shifted, not through strategy or bravery, but through an overlooked mechanical vulnerability. In this, there is a lesson about the nature of warfare. Victory is built on systems, on preparation, on the unseen labor that enables visible heroism. Machines, pilots, and strategies all rely on human diligence behind the lines. One mind, one set of hands, one careful adjustment can ripple through an entire theater, preserving lives and momentum alike. And perhaps most profoundly, this story reminds us that in war, as in life, the smallest interventions, the quiet, methodical acts of observation and correction can shape history as surely as any grand gesture. The engines returned to the sky. The missions went forward. And long after the noise of combat faded, the lesson remained that victory often depends on those who labor silently, steadfast, and unseen.